Thanks very much. First off, thanks very much. I don't really understand why anyone goes to Grand Rapids, Michigan in February and thinks they're not going to be in a snowstorm. So it was a little surprising to me. It wasn't very good travel planning on my part, but thanks for letting me come back again. One of the things that as Steve talked with me about doing this presentation, he asked about the impact hormones have on weight and weight management, which I will touch upon. But one of the things I'll say up front, and a little bit as an apology, it's not so good when the speakers are apologizing at the beginning of the lecture, but really what I'm going to talk a huge amount about is genetics. The genetics of weight and weight maintenance, and what we know about that and what we don't. I'm going to touch upon hormones and the kinds of therapies that we can do, and also talk a little bit about overall strategies for weight management and weight loss. I'm a reproductive endocrinologist. Reproductive endocrinology is a subspecialty in OBGYN. I was born in Eugene. I only lived here for a short period of time. My father was a construction worker. We moved very frequently. So I kind of grew up all over the West. I started college in Louisiana. I then moved to Portland, where I went to re-college for a while, and then I went to Portland State, where I completed my degree. I then went to medical school in New York City at Albert Einstein College of Medicine. I did my OBGYN and my fellowship training in reproductive endocrinology at Brigham and Women's Hospital. I moved back to Eugene after a very long absence about 17 years ago, and I work at Women's Care, which is a full specialty OBGYN practice. I'm very interested in weight issues because, as we all know, we are all struggling with weight. We're struggling with weight because we have genetics that are dictating that we're going to get heavier throughout our life, or we're struggling because we're aging. Aging makes us gain weight. Now, we have ways of opposing that. I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but we can do only so much. We have to really understand what we were predisposed to be before we go forward. I also have a speaking style. I am more than happy if you want to ask me a question. I can stop and answer questions. I also have a little bit of time after this, so if people want to ask questions privately after, I'm happy to do that as well. So one of the things about definitions, we right now in the medical field have a lot of complexity about how do we interact with people who are overweight. As you go to the doctor, you'll probably hear very frequently about your BMI. The definition of BMI there is, is outlined. And there are these very nice graphs of looking at BMI. I'm horrified when I look at my BMI because I have just lost 20 pounds. Before that, I was very significantly overweight. Now I'm just overweight. These BMI charts do not really look at our genetic stock. They actually are for the average person, and they tend to be on the low side. Probably what's much better if we're looking at the long-term health risk to us, it would be to look at our distribution of weight, the waist-to-hip ratio, which is very easily done, can be done with a tape measure at home. And what we're really looking for is the distribution of visceral or adiposity. The fat that is distributed, not necessarily under our skin, we don't like that, but really the distribution of fat inside of our abdomen. Actually, if you go see your doctor, I have tons of patients who feel like weight issues are sort of condemning issues. It's not like we're partnered together. It's somehow you get a definition of you're obese, you're overweight, you're morbidly obese. The morbidly obese is really, people are just like, I can't believe you said that about me when I got my chart notes. And I was like, it is a medical definition, but it also comes with a psychological cost as well. Now, the reason why we even care about weight is because of this graph. This is a really complicated graph, but what we're looking at here is the mortality in women and the mortality in men, and what we're looking at is BMI. This actually is a really great graph because you see it's U-shaped. It's not good to be too skinny. It's not good to be too heavy. The skinny people, you would say, well, who are those skinny people? Why are they dying? And one of the things about this is some of these people have eating disorders, and we know those are quite lethal. Some of these people are in the dying stages of their life. They're people with wasting. They're end-stage HIV disease, whatever the disease process. And so as you get really thin, your mortality goes way up. You'll see actually that it doesn't stop. The heavier we are, the more our mortality is. And it's very significant. If you look at from here to here, 3 times. Look here. It's a very significant rise in our mortality as our weight increases. Now, it's really clear that there are there's much information about what heaviness does to us. Heaviness actually causes coronary artery disease, hypertension. It makes the lipids in our blood abnormal. It contributes to the development of diabetes, asthma. Really big problem right now is obstructive sleep apnea. Lots of people have it. GERD or reflux, fatty liver, gallstones, liver problems, cirrhosis, bladders don't work very well, people get blood clots. So there's a whole litany of problems. I, in my practice, deal a lot with this. People who, as they get heavier, fall into anovulatory cycles, have infertility and polycystic ovary syndrome. I deal with men who, as their weight goes up, their estrogen level climbs, their testosterone level goes down, and their sperm production wanes as well. So I have a lot of the reproductive consequences. But as you can see, there is a huge amount of disability, medical problems that come from this. Clinical depression is a huge issue in people as they get heavier, probably not because of the heaviness, probably because of our societal response to heaviness. Now, why are we heavier than we used to be? We are heavier than we used to be. It is quite clear that Americans are getting heavier all the time. And we have a lot of different markers of that. One of the major reasons is because of lifestyle adjustment. The lifestyle adjustment is that we have a decrease in activity. And partly that's because of the type of work we do. I would dare say that the vast majority of us sit all day long. We sit because we're in front of a computer, or we're talking with people on the phone, or we're dealing with customers, or in your case, citizens. The sedentary lifestyle is really bad for us. Sitting is really bad for us. Now, we are trying to figure out how to get productive people in a technological society without sitting. And essentially, it's standing. So if we stand all day instead of sit all day, we actually have a very significant improvement in our health. We also are having less labor. So, it used to be that manufacturing was the major driver of the society that we lived in. It is no longer. Actually, we are a service industry. We do a lot more intellectual work than we do actually physical work. Part of the reason why we're decreasing the amount of labor is because of robotics. And robotics can be, how we make cars, but robotics is also the backhoe that we dig ditches with. I mean, people used to dig ditches, not backhoes. We also have cities where we don't walk. Europeans are significantly thinner because of their genetics and also because they walk all the time. And when we look around the industrialized nations of the world, Americans walk by far less than any other culture. Japanese walk a lot further than we do. French, Europeans, English, everybody else walks a lot more than we do, essentially because they live in cities where they have to walk or can walk, perhaps. We also have an increase in caloric intake, and a lot of that is because of changes in the family structure. It used to be that, 35 years ago, most women stayed at home. Most women actually cooked dinner, and they cooked dinner every day for their family. Now, actually, most women are in the workforce. There's really benefits to that. That's a wonderful thing, but it also means that it's hard to get dinner on the table. We use a lot more prepared foods, which we have been sold because of the industrialization of the food industry in America. We are happy that we have quick ways of preparing food, but on the same time, those foods are not necessarily as nutritious. There's a huge lack of portion control. Every time I ever even start to think this, I go to Olive Garden. I don't know if anybody's been to Olive Garden. Olive Garden serves food for 4. I mean, it's really a phenomenal experience when you look at the amount of calories that are in one of their portions. And lastly, it's our genetics. We didn't arrive in America willy-nilly. We came from very specific parts of the planet. And unfortunately, we came from the parts of the planet where obesity genes were much more prevalent. Now, one of my premises in this talk is to try to convince you that you are not in control of your weight. You are in control of what you do about weight, but you are not in control of it. Your genetics are. You were born into a body. That body has a manifestation as we're living. If you live in a culture where you're calorically restricted, you will be skinnier than you are here in America. We actually are nutritionally poor but calorically rich. Even the most poor among Americans generally has adequate calories. They don't have adequate nutrition, but they have adequate calories. This slide, which is a busy slide, is looking to try to figure out what is the nature of the genetics. What are we inheriting, which is giving us a risk of having obesity throughout our life? Each of these circles is basically a different study, and what we did was mapped heavy versus thin populations of people, and then we said what genes are more common. Unfortunately, these are all each genes. Those are all the names of certain sequences in the DNA. Unfortunately, we don't even know what those genes do yet. We know that they are distributed in a population. But again, we are not in control of this. Now, we have some really good models to try to look at obesity. One of them is in rodents. Rodents actually, or our white lab rats, are really helpful to us in medical science. These rats right here actually have a genetic abnormality that was engineered. The heavy rat, this one here, actually has an abnormality in the leptin gene. And I'll talk about that in just a second. When this research was done, we really thought, oh, this is wonderful because we're going to find out that all the people who are overweight have an abnormality in the leptin, basically a hormone that controls the amount of fat that we have in our body. And so we'll be able to engineer that. But it turns out, of course, nothing is ever that simple. Now, it is really clear that we have some really good models in humans for obesity. It turns out that we have genetic abnormalities that are 9 autosomal dominant, 10 autosomal recessive, and 5 X-linked. This is just the mode of inheritance. These are diseases in human beings that result in obesity. They are by far underrepresented in most of us. We don't have these conditions, but we still have the predisposition to unwanted weight gain. For instance, this is called Prader-Willi. Prader-Willi is a relatively common and uncommon genetic abnormalities. People with Prader-Willi, this is an adolescent person with Prader-Willi, they have a whole bunch of problems that go along with it. When they're babies, they actually have failure to thrive. As soon as they become closer to adolescence, they get a voracious appetite. Their appetite is so severe that, their parents have to lock the food in the kitchen. They have to lock the refrigerator. These kids will eat everything they have in the house. And what happens is they also have very significant obesity with no satiety. So most of the time, if we overeat, we feel full. We may choose to overeat some more because we have some emotional issues or because we really like what we're eating or because we're bored or whatever that might be. But we feel full. People with Prader-Willi never feel full. So if you're a parent and you have a child who, even though they are calorically rich, they're really overeating, they feel hungry, it's really hard. I mean, it'd be very difficult to be a parent of someone who said, you're not really hungry, because they really are hungry. We are looking to try to figure out what brain centers are influenced by appetite. Now, in this issue around the inheritability of predisposition to obesity, we really look at some very common models. Those models are twin studies. So if we have twins, one of them is raised in a family, the other one is adopted out, somehow they're separated, we then can come back and say, what is their body weight like? And it turns out that their body weight is like their genetic predisposition, not like the family that raised them. Adoptees, people who are adopted, carry their weight memory, their genetic memory for whatever their weight ought to be into their new family. And also we've been able to figure out that there are certain characteristics that we inherit. One of them is the metabolic rate. And I'll come back to this in just a second. We think that we can alter how much calories we're burning every day significantly. We cannot. It's actually sort of a myth. The great majority of the calories we're burning are set for us by our metabolic rate. We also, the other category where we burn a lot of calories is in the thermic response to food. Essentially, how much energy it takes to digest food and how much energy it takes to warm our bodies. We are furnaces, and it takes a lot of calories every day to keep us warm. We have a little bit of control because we can move. We can choose to move less. We can choose to move more. But it actually even turns out that the predisposition to moving is inherited. You say, wow, that family, everybody in that family, they're all, sporty, they all go hiking, they all like this, they all like that. And we think of it as, that's because they were raised in that family. They all spent time at the lake in the summer swimming or whatever. But it turns out that it's an inherited characteristic as well. Now, one of the real difficulties, and you probably have already experienced this very clearly in this series, is the mechanism that regulates energy expenditure is unknown. So when we find that thermostat, when we find that ability to tweak it, increase it or decrease it, we will have the answer to weight gain, weight reduction. But we don't actually know that. We don't know why, as we age, our regulation of energy decreases. We have some clues about that, and I'll come back to that in just a second. We also don't know the mechanism that regulates appetite. So when people say they're hungry, we say, oh, well, we don't know why you're hungry. Sometimes it's because we are hungry. We actually don't have enough calories going in our body. We're starving. But most of the time, that's not true. Now, when we start looking at the number of people who have weight issues, who have a genetic abnormality, it's minuscule. The vast majority of us, we have not been able to map a genetic problem. This is actually, these green arrows represent this leptin pathway. Leptin is a molecule which is really important. The body makes it, the brain receives it. The part of the brain that receives it is called the hypothalamus, which is extremely important for regulation of all sorts of different biological processes. Excuse me. In some people, there are abnormalities in leptin. And so we've been able to figure that, but it really is a very tiny, small percentage. We also have been able to inhibit leptin, the ability to sense leptin in humans, and it does not result in obesity. So in us, there must be a much more complicated pathway. If we don't have enough information about the genetics of obesity, then what we talk about is common obesity. So common obesity, again, my preposition to you is a genetic problem. It is not a character flaw. It is predisposed, and then we can do something about it. But essentially, it's by increasing energy intake and decreasing energy expenditure. So, we all know we increase energy intake because we eat more, or we eat things that are more calorically rich. Probably, as you already know, that different kinds of foods are much more calorically rich. Oils are much heavier in terms of calories than proteins or carbohydrates. Decreased energy expenditure is partially activity, but it's largely due to aging and genetics. Now, the controllers of appetite have been looked at. These here are actually biological products. They are hormones. They're neurotransmitters or hormones. They are very important. They are stimulated by psychological factors. Again, how we learn to eat, how we learn to feel satiety, how we learn to feel nurtured. They have to do with gut signals. And this is a huge area of active interest right now. These neural or vagal inputs are what's happening in gastric bypass surgery. So in gastric bypass surgery, sometimes we damage the bowel. Sometimes we actually take out a part of the intestine so you can't digest the food. That's not so great. So people who have the traditional Roux-en-Y end up having very significant nutritional difficulties where they're anemic, they have a lot of problems with that. But actually you don't have to do that. You can just bang up the digestive system. You can actually make the stomach smaller, and the person actually has less ability to eat, but really they have much less desire to eat. So they feel satiated very rapidly. And it really is these nervous inputs to the central nervous system that have changed dramatically. The same as with these gut peptides. These peptides have to do with signaling the brain whether or not you need to take nutrients. We generally are calorically in excess. So most of us living in an industrialized society daily eat more calories than we need, but we don't gain weight. So most of the time we actually go up to a certain level of weight gain, and then we are maintaining it for long periods of time, even though we're calorically in excess. How does that happen? How does the body know to lower the efficiency of pulling nutrition out of our gut? We don't know, but it does actually. Metabolites, actually, those things like certain foods make us much more hungry. And more often than not, you know that. For me, apples. I eat an apple and I am so ravenous an hour later. I just like a hole in my stomach. Some gut experience for me. Other people don't have that, but I really do. Hormones, we're going to talk about a little bit more, and also cultural factors. Now, as I was talking before about what's under our control and what's not, this is a really good thing to remember. The basal metabolic rate, the amount of energy that is required to be alive, is not fixed by us. It's fixed by our biology. The 70% number is a little bit variable. Some people would say it's higher than that, but about 2/3 of our energy is in the basal metabolic requirements. Thermogenesis, which really has to do with food, cold, stress, it actually has about 15%. So really, we are looking at a very small amount of our caloric expenditure under our control, that 15%. In a minute, I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means in terms of weight loss and exercise versus weight loss and dieting. There is a set point. That set point in the central nervous system is, again, genetically set, but it's altered. As we gain weight, we reset our set point to maintain our higher weight. And we have to do something to actually get that reset. What's been found recently that is really irritating for those of us who want to lose weight is that when you lose weight, you cannot eat the typical amount of calories that people who started at that lower weight eat. You actually have to drop your caloric intake by 20% to maintain your weight reduction. So it's not one of those things where you say, okay, I overeat, now I'm going to eat less, I'm going to lose 10 pounds, and then I'm going to overeat again. Because you will not maintain your weight at that point. You will gain all that weight back. And in fact, you have to drop even more calories to be able to maintain that weight. Now, one of also the really difficult things about weight loss is the heavier you are, the more calories you get and still lose weight. Anyone who's been to Weight Watchers knows that. Like you're envious because someone's got 40 points. Like you get 26 points. It's like, how's that, And that's because body mass burns calories. And so you have to maintain that. So as you get skinnier, your caloric intake drops. You have to get leaner and leaner to be able to continue to lose weight. That's really frustrating again. Partly the reason for that is because you're losing lean body weight. You're losing the muscle weight that really is calorically burning lots of calories. And there's a lot of research going into if you eat more protein and less carbohydrates and fat, can you maintain that lean body weight? Can you maintain our muscle mass during the weight loss program? And the jury is out on that. We don't really know how that works right now. That's the nature why men lose weight quicker than women. We'll talk a little bit about hormones and their effect, but it's essentially that men are bigger in their lean body mass than women. So their caloric requirements are significantly greater. That means that they can eat more. People often have a sense of, oh no, it's something about being a man or being a woman that does it. It does not. It is just basically a mass equation. Now, when I talked about the genetics, people will say, well, how can you decide whether you have the genetics of getting heavy? And there are a whole bunch of ways of doing that. Some of them we use clinically, many not yet. But we can actually measure the metabolic rate. The metabolic rate is the amount of energy that's burned every day in doing non-directed activity. You can actually go to a metabolic laboratory and ask for that. You can look at how your body uses carbohydrates. You can look at insulin resistance and whether or not you have an unusual response when you take a carbohydrate load into your system in terms of the amount of insulin, the hormone that allows that sugar to be distributed. And you also can look at what your vagus tone is. Again, what are those signals coming from the gut telling the brain what to do? Other predictors actually are really interesting. The lower your socioeconomic status, the higher the probability of being obese. Why that is, no one knows. It doesn't turn out that it is the food we eat. It has something more to do with the genetics of who ends up at the low end of the socioeconomic scale. Lower educational level, Obviously, when you stop smoking, people gain a considerable amount of weight. But there are some just really easy surrogates. Birth weight. Be a baby born more than 9 pounds, and you're going to have a significantly more difficult time maintaining weight and having childhood obesity. Now, in terms of hormonal changes with aging, because one of the problems that we all have is we get heavier as we age. It is inevitable. Now, we may do something about that. We may actually change our lifestyle to be able to lose weight. But all of us get heavier, and then we get skinny. So nobody dies an old age death and is heavy. If you look at the obituaries in the Register Guard, and you look at the real pictures, not the ones from a long time ago, but if you look at them, and the person is 80, nobody's heavy. They are all skinny. There is a wasting effect, a metabolic effect that occurs as we age, which results in a very substantial weight reduction as we get older. So in men, when we look at aging, we notice that there's a decrease in growth hormone. There are a lot of people who would like us to be treated with growth hormone, but growth hormone costs $25,000 a year. It's really hard to get the insurance companies to pay for it, and we believe, and the medical community, that the decrease in growth hormone is a normal effect. It isn't a pathological effect, it's normal. But some people believe that treating with growth hormone will be help. There's decreased gonadal steroids, decreased testosterone. Decreasing testosterone is associated with weight gain in men. It also is correlated with a whole bunch of metabolic problems that, if we can oppose that, will be reduced. Increasing visceral fat, again, not what's under our skin that matters as much, it's what's inside of our abdomen. So the pot belly is the worst thing we can have. It's much better actually to have weight distributed equally among our body. When we actually have increased visceral fat, what we're seeing is that the men's increasing estrogens increase very substantially. Estrogens actually cause an increase in sex hormone binding globulin. That's the protein that carries the testosterone throughout our body. That means that the active free testosterone drops very considerably, and many men know that because they start to have problems with erectile dysfunction. The decrease in the effect of an absolute testosterone level is profound. And we now have a country where there are a whole bunch of T clinics, like they are franchises. There are many cities where you go to the T clinic because T is testosterone and men are treated with testosterone whether it's low or not. There is a metabolic problem when the testosterone level is low. It isn't necessarily something that you want to give people this hormone if it isn't low. For women, actually, they have very similar, but women have a dramatic change in their lives that men don't have, and that's menopause. Menopause actually is a reworking of the endocrine system that is profound and has consequences which we don't fully understand. We know that actually with just normal aging, there's a decrease in growth hormone. We know actually that testosterone level increases in women, not the absolute level, but the functional level, because as they lose estrogen, it no longer is there to oppose testosterone. We know that there's increased visceral fat, and we also know that in a younger woman, that has a consequence of tipping some women who are predisposed to it into anovulation, not cycling regularly. We know also that this increased visceral fat production goes way up in menopause. So I see women who the only problem they experience is, I am 15 pounds weight more than I've ever been before. I've done nothing different. I'm exactly as I always have been before. And why is that? And the answer is menopause. Menopause causes weight increase of unclear etiology. Women also often will gain weight very appreciably before menarche. So if you have a latency age girl, she often really will increase weight before she starts her period. Weight drops through the teenage years and then increases in the 20s. Again, why that is occurring, we don't know, but it is biologically regulated. And the other real problem for most women is if they have pregnancy, turns out that in America, pregnant women gain 10 to 15 pounds for every pregnancy. So if you have one child, you're 10 pounds heavier. You gain more than that, come back down, but you don't come back to your baseline. You come back to a new, heavier state of being, and every time you have another baby, you actually gain another 10 to 15 pounds. So it doesn't take very long before someone is 30 or 45 pounds overweight. Now, again, that doesn't mean you have to be overweight. It just means that that's sort of the biological basis of it. I think you've already probably heard about this. It's very clear that the way to lose weight is through behavioral modification. Behavioral modification basically works really well. We know that. It's hard to do, but essentially it's about self-monitoring. It's about learning to log what you're eating, how much you're eating, learning to control stimuluses that activate eating. I have a whole bunch of patients in my practice who, when we start with dietary logging, and they bring it back to me after a month, and I weigh them, and they've lost no weight, and they're actually eating 1,200 calories a day. I say, you have an eating disorder. You have an overeating disorder, because you cannot not lose weight on 1,200 calories a day. That's been found over and over again. Any person put on 1,200 calories a day in a supervised setting loses weight. Really, we have not found anybody who won't lose weight. So people who don't lose weight on 1,200 calories self-reported are not eating 1,200 calories. They're eating more calories than that. That's not because they're liars. It's not because they're deceivers. It's because they don't count certain calories. It's not a character flaw. It actually is a cognitive way of looking at life. It's talking about how you eat, contracting to try to figure out how that's going to work. And one of the major ways of losing weight is by having circles of with people doing weight reduction. That's very important, that self-help groups. Modification of physical activities, which is extremely important because, again, so much of this is not under our control. Again, it's been found that you can't lose much weight by just exercise. You don't. It's not very effective at doing that. You have to restrict calories, but you certainly feel a lot better, and there is amazing health benefits by exercise. Social support, cognitive restructuring, and problem solving. Problem solving, just as if something doesn't work, try something else. Again, this is just basically reminding you that there is standards about how many calories should be eaten to maintain weight. I find actually that there's a lot of internet instruments that work extremely effectively. It's not hard to do your dietary logging on the internet. We have just did a contest in our office in which we had a kind of a Biggest Loser kind of contest, and lots of people did it. People came up with lots of instruments. The one that worked best for me was called Chronometer. It's a free thing. You just put in how much you're eating, and the amount of calories come up. It keeps a running total, so every day you kind of go like, what more could I eat? It also calculates, if you exercise, how many extra calories you get. One of the biggest really problems that we found was that our portion control is poor. We actually are enculturated into thinking that we need to eat more than we actually do. The amount of exercise we have to do to maintain our weight substantially increases throughout our lives. That's because our basal metabolic rate drops. So the calories we're burning just by being alive drop. Turns out that at 25, you need about 150 minutes a week to maintain weight with a reasonable diet. Around 50, you need an hour a day. An hour a day. And so we don't think of it like that. We don't think, oh, as we get older, we really need to be buffed up. We really need to go to the gym. We need to go out and run more and more and more. An hour a day is a huge investment for many of us. We don't have an extra hour a day. But really, it requires a very significant increase in physical activity to maintain weight. The other thing is that exercise for weight reduction without caloric restriction really results in very modest, usually about 1/10 of a kilogram a week in weight reduction, partially because it's converting fat to muscle, and muscle weighs a lot. And so if we want to lose weight, we have to actually get the eating part of it going as well. This slide is just really to remind you that not only does weight reduction actually just help us look better and fit in our clothes better, which I guess is a nice thing, but it really does help us with avoiding heart disease. It helps us with not getting blood clots. It helps us with the risk factors for both stroke and heart disease. It changes the way our nervous system works. It actually improves our central nervous system functioning. People who exercise regularly actually have better brain power. They remember things much better. They sleep better. And basically, it actually helps the heart's rhythm work better. In medical therapy, when we start using medications, we start talking about extremely modest benefits. So people often will come to me, and there are some medications I use, but they will say, well, I really want to lose weight. What should I take? And we think it's successful when you lose about a pound a week for 8 weeks. So these are the short-term studies where the FDA approves a drug. They say, that person lost 8 or 10 pounds and it was in 2 or 3 months. Doesn't say anything about, well, what happened the year after that, what happened 2 or 3 years after that. Was it cumulative? Did that weight reduction continue to happen? And most of them, it's really modest. Drugs are licensed for weight reduction by the FDA if you can drop 5% of your body weight by 6 months. So that's their cutoff to say we will allow this drug to be sold or not. There are some drugs that are really used. Again, I think that these are all second line. The drug that of choice for me is called Phentermine. Phentermine is an amphetamine. It basically is speed. It is a biologically good drug. People like being on it because it increases their activity. Its major effect is not in increasing caloric burning. Its major effect is it's an appetite suppressant. If you have a child who has ADD, you got to get breakfast in that kid before they take their morning pill, or they will not eat. They don't eat lunch. They sometimes don't want dinner. So kids losing weight on those hyperactivity drugs is really common. The same is true of of adults. Here's actually a look at one of the major studies looking at Phentermine. Phentermine actually can be used for long periods of time. It was part of Fen-Phen, and Fen-Phen was removed by the FDA because it caused cardiac valvular abnormalities. This part is still licensed. It does not have that problem. This is looking at it's being used for 36 weeks. And basically, there's a considerable weight loss, 24 pounds. But for many people, 24 pounds is a drop in the bucket. I mean, that's a beginning. And you'll look there, it really becomes like a plateau. It does not have an infinite use. The way I use it in my practice is I give it for 3 months. I ask the person to call us up and tell us how much weight they've lost. Each month, I have them weigh once a month. And if they're continuing to lose weight, we just continue it 3 months, 3 months, 3 months. And at some point, we say, you know what, you're not losing any more weight, so we should really stop it. And a lot of people, if they have modest weight reduction, do fine with that. Here are the bariatric surgeries, the way we can reconnect. And again, this one right here, which is called the Roux-en-Y, the old way where we divert nutrition away from the small bowel, results in malnutrition. Essentially, when you see somebody who's had a Roux-en-Y, after a while, they look grim. Now, they may be really skinny, but as a physician, it's really hard to look at people who are gray. They have a very unusual cast to their skin, and it's not a bad surgery, but it has a consequence to it. These more modern surgeries where they actually have a lap band, this is a vertical band gastrostomy, they are actually less impairing. But they also do have consequences as well. For many people, however, these are really required because we've got to change the gut-brain system. Not necessarily the nutrition coming down, because if you want to, you can just practice eating. I have a patient who totally overwhelmed their gastric bypass surgery because they basically said, I'm going to eat every hour. I'm going to set my alarm clock. I'm going to get up. I'm not going to lose a pound. Now, they didn't say it consciously. Of course, they said it unconsciously. But they lost not a pound, even though they had to really change their lifestyle to be able to get all those calories in to maintain the weight. In general, though, people don't do that because they're not hungry. Most of us overeat because we're hungry. And if we can decrease hunger, we actually feel much better. So, in summary, my primary message is, it's not to say that we are at the mercy of our genetics, but we are genetically programmed to have certain weights. Our lifestyle compounds that genetic predisposition. If we were living on mountaintop and we went up and down the mountain every day to our jobs, we would be less heavy than we would be. But again, we can't determine our genetics. The way that we can is by decreasing our caloric intake and increasing our caloric expenditure. sort of what you know about. Pharmacotherapy can be helpful, those medications for people, especially if they can't get started, especially if somebody is overweight and they just say, I've tried everything, I can't get going. Often it's a booster start, because a little bit of priming the pump works really well, and surgical options can be really helpful. But they really should be viewed as a last resort because they are permanent. Most of them are permanent. So, thank you very much. I'm more than happy to have questions if anybody has a question. Yep.
Just based on your presentation, it sounds like there's a drug that you recommend, but there's not really hormone replacements that will impact the growth.
So the question is you know, I recommend amphetamines for weight loss. What about hormone replacement? It's actually interesting. In women, hormone replacement therapy in the menopause is associated with no loss of weight, but better weight distribution. So the adiposity that occurs in the abdomen is lessened by being on hormone replacement therapy, but overall weight is the same. In men, actually, who are hypogonadal with low testosterone levels, using testosterone replacement substantially reduces weight because it really builds lean muscle mass. It's a anabolic steroid, so it increases the muscle mass, and muscle burns much more calories than does fat. And so it very substantially helps with weight reduction. But
The safety, because you hear that the hormone replacement can be dangerous, and you know, you've been hearing about T clinics and how increasing your testosterone can actually cause health problems as well.
So the issue there is, you know, how safe is this? How safe it is for men to take testosterone? And it's clear that if somebody has a normal testosterone, they should not be increasing their testosterone. So these are, you know, again, the problem with T clinics are that they're sort of trendy, and people often go there without much of a medical diagnosis to receive testosterone. If a man has low testosterone level, which is not a very simple thing to determine, to tell you the truth, testosterone is regulated diurnally, so the level of it is very significantly altered during the day. It should be checked in the morning while fasting to see whether or not it really is low or not. Also, the problem with hormones, not just testosterone, but all of our hormones, is that the range of normal is based on the population. It's not based on the individual person. You know, it'd be wonderful if when we are in our prime, we went to the doctor and they checked everything they could think of. And then we would say, well, when you're not in your prime, what's off now? You know, like what's your, you know, so normal testosterone levels in the laboratory we use are from 350 to 850 in men. But there are some men who were 727 their whole life, and now they are 500 and they feel hypogonadal. And those men should actually have testosterone replacement. So it's a kind of a complex rubric to try to figure out who should be treated. In women, it's much, much more complicated because women have a natural cessation of gonadal hormones in the mid part of their life. Menopause is not a disease. Menopause is a natural thing. So are all natural things good? You know, we have a real physiological or a philosophical discussion. You know, malaria a good thing, or should we, you know, just be okay with malaria? What about tapeworms? They're natural, you know, that's fine as well. So we have this discussion where we get into, well, what is the benefit and what is the risk? I can talk like for a minute or two about women and hormone replacement therapy, but it's a really complex subject and we probably wouldn't do it much justice. Let me say that it's quite controversial right now in the medical community. What are the risks of hormone replacement therapy? And it's controversial because the best study to date, which was ever designed, is called the Women's Health Initiative, the WHI study. The Women's Health Initiative study is now more than 15 years old and was expected, it was funded by a drug company that makes estrogen. It was expected that it would be the best thing ever. You know, it would be fabulous. They put a ton of money into this study. It turns out it ruined their market. So who's going to ever pay for that study again? No drug company that makes estrogen because they already shot themselves in the foot about it. It is a study that is so complex because they used women who were very much past the menopause. They wanted it to be a blinded study so that the woman who is taking a placebo or taking hormone replacement therapy would not be able to know. Well, if you're having hot flashes, you know in an hour or two when you take estrogen, oh, I'm on the estrogen or I'm on the placebo. It is very rapidly metabolized in its woman's system, and you go from not sleeping to sleeping. It's like, oh, this is really, I know what's going on. So what they did was they took women who were more than 10 years past the menopause to treat them. We're curious as to whether that represents most women who use hormone therapy. Most women don't stop hormones. They don't go through menopause, and 10 years later they decide, maybe I want to try that. Let's see how that goes. They actually start hormone therapy because they have physiological symptoms, mostly hot flashes and night sweats and sort of cognitive changes and a whole myriad of things that are very acute. By 10 years, most women say, I've adjusted. I'm really okay. I don't have to take hormone therapy anymore. So the target population that showed the hormone replacement therapy wasn't ideal is not the standard target population. Someday, maybe you'll have hormones throughout life, and we could talk about that a little bit more. Somebody else had a question? Yeah?
I have a question about hypothyroidism, and I wonder if that's on the rise for women, and if the diagnosis of that is cut and dried, or is it gray, shades of gray?
So, question about hypothyroidism, what's happening in terms of population, and also, is it that clear? So, two things. It is not very clear, the diagnosis. The diagnosis really is made by the symptomatology that the person is experiencing. And there is a myriad of things that thyroid hormone does, and it's really necessary to do. Again, some people, when we measure their thyroid hormone levels, they're in the normal range, but the normal range is huge, again, based on population, not based on an individual human being. So when we see that, many clinicians are loath to start people on thyroid medications. I often see people who have been hypothyroid by their report for many years because they're borderline, essentially, and people don't want to sort of commit them to lifelong therapy. Yeah, and the incidence of hypothyroidism is increasing in proportion to other autoimmune dysfunctions. Americans have more autoimmune diseases, higher rates of lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, than they did in the past. And most cases of hypothyroidism are autoimmune based. Somebody had a question?
If you could address the relationship between stress, appetite, and hormones.
Yep. The question is about the relationship between stress, appetite, and hormones. So stress actually is a very difficult concept to biologically define, because when we are talking about stress, we're generally talking about the perception of feeling uptight, anxious or whatever. When we do it biologically, we measure cortisol. So cortisol is the hormone that is occurring, that is being produced at all times in our adrenal glands that lie above our kidneys. It is an incredibly important hormone. Every cell uses it at all times. It actually changes the resilience of our body. When you're stressed, biologically or psychologically, sociologically, what happens is cortisol production goes up, and a whole bunch of things occur because of that. One of them is insulin resistance. So when somebody is stressed, insulin, which is the hormone that distributes the sugar that we get from our food or that we produce ourselves into all the cells as fuel, it doesn't work as well. It means that blood sugar rises, and blood sugar rising is an independent risk factor for all the bad stuff that we're talking about. It actually opposes the action of the normal reproductive hormones that we have. Also, when cortisol rises, secretion from the central nervous system of the pituitary hormones to tell the ovaries or the testes what to do drops. So it makes people actually lower the reproductive capabilities. We see that in women more profoundly because given enough stress or enough cortisol production, women stop ovulating. They become amenorrheic. And when they become amenorrheic, essentially the body is saying, you're not in a good enough place to have a baby at this point in time. Things have to get better. With men, what we see actually is that it drops their testosterone level. Sometimes to the level where erectile problems develop, often not. They're unaware that the stress is harming them. it's hard because we were biologically programmed to have episodic stress. I mean, that is the nature of being a human being or even being just alive. So we actually have this ability to go from, sort of our sedate self to our highly stressed self and then return back to the sedate person that we are, or organism. We don't live in a culture, unfortunately, that allows much return to the normal non-stress state. So neuropsychologists, or people who look at the way we process information, recognize that we are in process overload. Human brains were not actually made or did not evolve to be able to process the amount of information in the times that we are right now. One of the things that people talk about is the distraction factor. Humans are distracted. We are distracted because we're not engineered to pay attention to more than one thing at a time. Multitasking is a myth. There really are no people who multitask. There are many people, women mostly, who can individually task. So they are able to change their perception from one job to the next job, back and forth, and to really keep them all separate. Aging actually decreases that, and hormone deficiency significantly impairs that as well. But really, our problem in our culture is that we have adrenal fatigue. We, as a culture, are overstressed, overstimulated, without enough, restfulness. And there's a whole bunch of literature about how to create restfulness. There's a really elegant experiment that looks at walking in a city or walking on a track versus walking in nature. And walking in nature has a phenomenal improvement in terms of cortisol levels and in health benefits that come from it.
So you say your cortisol might be related to your appetite, the increase or decrease?
I actually don't know. I don't think cortisol itself is, because high cortisol levels, people often decrease their appetite, but they also decrease their impulse control. So I don't know whether it really is the appetite, whether it's the gut part of that, or whether or not it's the central nervous system processing part that says, I'm hungry, I'm gonna eat. Most of the time we can oppose that because we have our frontal cortex that basically says, yeah, but you shouldn't be eating that, it's not good for you, eat something better for you. But when you're in a high stress level, it actually changes neural processing. So I actually don't know the answer to it, but yep.
What is your experience shown about sustained weight loss after using Phentermine? Does it have a better record than other weight loss methods for sustaining weight loss?
What I heard was, what was my experience around sustained weight loss by using Phentermine? No, it's not good. It's because again, if the psyche isn't around the adjustment in lifestyle and really dropping that caloric intake 20% below what you would think for the maintenance of the new weight, it won't work. It will not. In some ways, I'm not sure if you're asking this, but is it just a trick? Is it just kind of this cheapness of saying, oh yeah, I can get you some weight reduction, really not sustained, really not? And the answer is yes. But if somebody is stuck and cannot get going, like has a real sense of, I've tried everything, I can't do it, then actually it can be a really helpful thing. Thanks very much. It was really nice talking with you.